Get in the house! You're turning blue! The weathered rancher shouted through howling wind, throwing his heavy coat over the collapsed black woman clutching her small daughter in the deadly snowstorm. The neighboring cattleman called him Old Ironwood, a dried-up hermit destined to drink himself into an early grave on his failing ranch. They whispered he'd been dying slowly for 3 winters, ever since fever took his wife. But this runaway healer carries secrets that could save his life, while deadly pursuers closing in threaten to destroy them both. She holds ancient knowledge that his body desperately needs, yet helping her means signing his own death warrant. The marshal hunting her isn't who he claims to be, and the stakes reach far beyond a simple manhunt. Will saving each other cost them everything, or will their forbidden alliance rewrite both their fates? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The bottle slipped from Ezekiel Morrison's weathered hands, shattering against the porch boards. Whiskey soaked into the frozen wood as another coughing fit doubled him over. Blood specked the snow at his feet. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah died in their bed. Fever burning through her like wildfire. 3 years since he'd spoken more than 10 words to another human being. The neighboring ranchers called him Old Ironwood now, a broken man drinking himself to death on a failing spread. Zeke straightened, wiping his mouth with a trembling hand. The December wind cut through his torn coat like a blade. Half his cattle had died in the early freeze. The bank would come for the ranch soon enough. Maybe that would be a mercy. A distant sound made him lift his head. Voices carried on the wind, thin and desperate. He squinted through the swirling snow toward his front gate. 2 figures stumbled through the storm. A woman clutched a small child against her chest, both of them staggering like wounded deer. The woman's legs gave out 20 yards from his porch. She collapsed face first into the snow, the child crying beneath her. Zeke's boots crunched across the yard. The woman was unconscious, her dark skin ashen with cold. The little girl couldn't be more than 8, her lips blue as winter sky. "Get in the house. You're turning blue," Zeke said, throwing his coat over the woman. He scooped up the child first, her tiny body light as kindling. The woman was heavier, dead weight in his arms, but he managed to get them both inside. The cabin held the ghost of warmth from his dying fire. Zeke laid them on the floor near the hearth and fed fresh wood to the flames. The child's eyes fluttered open, wide with terror at seeing his bearded face. "Easy now," Zeke whispered. "You're safe." He wrapped them in every blanket he owned. The woman's breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. Frostbite marked her fingertips. The child watched him with the wariness of a hunted animal. "What's your name?" Zeke asked gently. "Ruby," she whispered. "That's a pretty name. I'm Zeke. This is my house." Ruby's mother stirred as the warmth seeped back into her bones. Her eyes snapped open, immediately searching for her daughter. When she saw Ruby safe in Zeke's arms, some of the panic left her face. "Where are we?" Her voice was hoarse, guarded. "My ranch. Found you both near frozen in the snow." The woman struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. Zeke noticed how she examined Ruby with practiced hands, checking for injury with the precision of someone who knew medicine. She tested the child's fingers for frostbite, looked into her eyes, felt her pulse. "She needs warm broth," the woman said, "and dry clothes. I'll see what I can find." Zeke rummaged through Sarah's old trunk, finding a dress that might fit Ruby and a shawl for her mother. He heated canned soup over the fire, the smell filling the cabin with something like comfort. The woman introduced herself as Delilah Freeman. She said little else, but Zeke caught the way her eyes darted to the windows, always listening for sounds outside. These were people running from something. Dawn brought visitors. 3 men on horseback rode into the yard, their leader wearing a marshal's badge. Zeke stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "Marshal Briggs," the man said, "looking for 2 escaped convicts, a colored woman and her child. They robbed their employer down in Louisiana, been tracking them for weeks." Zeke's face remained stone. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description." "You sure about that? Tracks in the snow lead right to your door. Storm last night. Could be anyone's tracks." Briggs studied him with cold eyes. "Mind if we search the premises?" "You got a warrant?" "Don't need one for harboring fugitives." Zeke stepped forward, his hand resting on the rifle beside his door. This is my land, Marshal. You want to search it, you bring paper that says you can. The marshal's jaw tightened, but he nodded to his men. They wheeled their horses around and rode off, but Zeke knew they'd be back. Inside, Delilah stood by the window, having watched the entire exchange. "Thank you," she said quietly. "They'll return with a warrant, or without one if they get desperate enough." Delilah's shoulders sagged. "We should go. I won't bring trouble to your door." "Where will you go? Storm's getting worse." She had no answer for that. Ruby clung to her mother's dress, sensing the adult's fear. "We're not convicts," Delilah said finally. "But we are running." "From what?" "Men who think they own us." Zeke understood. The war had been over for more than a decade, but some folks still acted like nothing had changed. He'd seen enough cruelty to recognize it in Marshal Briggs's eyes. Another coughing fit seized him. This one was worse, lasting nearly a minute. When it passed, Delilah was studying him with the same clinical attention she'd given Ruby. "How long have you had that cough?" she asked. "Few months. Gets worse when it's cold." She moved closer, her fear momentarily forgotten. "May I?" Zeke nodded, unsure what she intended. Delilah placed her hand against his forehead, then his neck, feeling for swollen glands. She listened to his breathing, watched the rise and fall of his chest. Her face went very still. "Mr. Morrison," she said carefully, "when did you last see a doctor?" "Haven't needed a doctor," Zeke said, but his voice carried less conviction than his words. Delilah's hands were gentle as she examined him, but her expression grew more troubled with each passing moment. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening to the rattle in his lungs. When she pulled back, her face was grave. "You have consumption, Mr. Morrison." The words hit him like a physical blow. Zeke had suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Final. "How long?" he asked. "Without treatment? 3 months? Maybe 4 if you're lucky." Ruby looked up from the floor where she'd been playing with wooden spoons. "What's consumption?" "It's when someone gets very sick," Delilah said softly. "But sometimes we can help make them better." Zeke laughed bitterly. "There's no cure for what I've got." "The white doctors don't have a cure," Delilah corrected. "But my grandmother treated consumption for 40 years, lost maybe 1 patient in 10. Something stirred in Zeke's chest that wasn't the disease. Hope was a dangerous thing for a dying man, but he couldn't quite push it away. "Your grandmother was a doctor?" "A healer. Taught me everything she knew before she passed." Delilah moved to his kitchen, examining the meager supplies. "You've been living on whiskey and hardtack. No wonder you're dying." She began pulling items from his pantry with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Salt, dried herbs, a small jar of honey Sarah had left behind. "I can help you," Delilah said, "if you'll let me." Zeke studied her face. This woman had her own troubles, her own reasons to run. Yet she was offering to save his life. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved ours." Ruby tugged at Delilah's skirt. "Mama, can we stay here?" The question hung in the air between them. Staying meant danger for all of them, but leaving meant Zeke would die alone, and Delilah and Ruby would freeze in the wilderness. "We can't impose on Mr. Morrison's kindness," Delilah said carefully. "Impose?" Zeke looked around his empty cabin. "Lady, I haven't had a real conversation in 3 years. You'd be doing me the favor." That afternoon, Delilah began her work. She boiled water with strange herbs that filled the cabin with earthy scents. She made Zeke drink bitter teas that burned his throat but seemed to quiet his cough. She threw out his whiskey despite his protests. "Alcohol weakens the blood," she explained, "makes it harder to fight the disease." Ruby helped by organizing Zeke's scattered belongings. The child had an eye for order, arranging his books by size and gathering scattered tools into neat piles. Her presence transformed the silent cabin into something that felt almost like a home. On the second day, Zeke's cough improved noticeably. The constant ache in his chest eased enough for him to sleep through the night. When he woke, he found Delilah tending a pot over the fire while Ruby sat nearby, trying to sound out words from one of Sarah's old books. "She's a smart one," Zeke said, settling into his chair. "Too smart for her own good sometimes." Delilah ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to him. "Eat all of it. Your body needs to rebuild what the sickness has taken. The soup was rich with vegetables and herbs he couldn't identify. It tasted better than anything he'd eaten in years. Where did you learn all this? My grandmother was born in Africa, brought her knowledge across the ocean and passed it down. Delilah's voice carried pride and sadness. She could heal anything from a broken bone to a broken heart. What happened to her? Old age, finally. She was 93 when she passed, still delivering babies and setting bones right up to the end. Ruby looked up from her book. Mama knows everything Grandmama knew. She helped birth all the babies on the plantation. Ruby, Delilah warned gently. What? It's true. You saved Mr. Johnson's arm when the cotton gin caught it. And you helped Miss Mary when her baby was coming backward. Zeke began to understand the scope of Delilah's knowledge. She wasn't just someone who knew home remedies. She was a trained healer with decades of experience. Why are they really after you? He asked. Delilah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. The plantation owner's son attacked a young girl, hurt her badly. They brought me in to treat her injuries and wanted me to say she died of fever, make it look natural. But you didn't. I couldn't. That girl deserved justice, not a lie to cover up what he'd done. Delilah stirred the pot with more force than necessary. When I refused to falsify my medical opinion, I became a problem that needed solving. So you ran. With Ruby. In the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. Been moving north ever since. That evening, as Ruby slept on a makeshift bed near the fire, Zeke and Delilah sat in companionable silence. His breathing was easier than it had been in months. The constant weight on his chest had lifted enough that he could think about something other than dying. How long will the treatments take? He asked. Months. Maybe a year to fully clear the infection from your lungs. And you'd stay that long? Delilah met his eyes. If you'll have us. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside the cabin felt warm and safe. For the first time in 3 years, Zeke allowed himself to imagine a future that stretched beyond the next few weeks. Ruby stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like Papa Zeke. Both adults pretended not to hear, but something had shifted between them, something that felt dangerously like family. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt natural despite its strangeness. Zeke's cough disappeared almost entirely. The gray pallor left his skin, replaced by something that looked like actual health. Delilah's treatments worked better than any medicine he'd ever known. Ruby had claimed the cabin as her own territory. She organized his books by subject, swept the floors without being asked, and chattered constantly about everything she discovered. Her laughter filled spaces that had been silent for years. Mr. Zeke, what's this word? Ruby held up one of Sarah's books, pointing to a line of text. Astronomy, the study of stars. Can you teach me about stars? Maybe tonight, if the clouds clear. Delilah smiled as she prepared his afternoon tea. These small moments of normalcy felt precious and fragile, like something that could shatter with the wrong word or sudden noise. That afternoon, Zeke's prize mare developed a severe limp. The horse favored her right foreleg, barely touching it to the ground. Zeke examined the injury but couldn't determine the cause. Might have to put her down, he said grimly. Wait. Delilah approached the mare slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The animal, usually skittish with strangers, calmed under her touch. Delilah ran her hands along the horse's leg with the same methodical precision she'd used examining Zeke. She found a deep puncture wound hidden beneath the thick winter coat, already showing signs of infection. Stepped on something sharp, the wound's gone bad. Delilah studied the injury carefully. I can save her, but I'll need to clean this out and drain the infection. She worked for an hour, using tools she'd fashioned from Zeke's kitchen supplies. Her movements were confident and sure. The mare stood perfectly still, as if sensing Delilah's intent to help. When she finished, the wound was clean and properly bandaged. She mixed a poultice from herbs she'd gathered around the ranch, applying it with practiced skill. She'll be fine in a week, Delilah said. Keep the wound clean and change the bandage daily. Zeke stared at his valuable mare, who was already putting weight on the injured leg. Where did you learn to treat animals? Same place I learned to treat people. Sickness is sickness, whether it's in a man or a horse. You could make a good living as a veterinarian. Delilah's laugh held no humor. Not many folks would trust a colored woman with their livestock. Even fewer would pay her for the privilege. That evening, Dr. Samuel Hayes arrived unannounced. The town physician had known Zeke since before Sarah's death, had watched him deteriorate over the past 3 years. His surprise at Zeke's improved appearance was obvious. "Ezekiel, you look remarkably well." "Feeling better?" "I can see that. Your color is good. Your breathing seems easier." Hayes studied him with professional interest. "What changed? Clean living, I suppose?" "Clean living doesn't cure advanced consumption." Hayes's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the organized space, the smell of herbal teas, the small signs of feminine presence. "Someone's been taking care of you." Zeke's response was carefully neutral. "Been taking better care of myself." But Hayes was too observant, too experienced with medical matters to be fooled. His gaze lingered on the cup of herbal tea cooling on the table, the organized medical supplies barely visible in the kitchen. "Ezekiel, if someone is helping you, someone with medical knowledge, I'd like to meet them. There's nobody here but me." Hayes nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he didn't believe it. After he left, Zeke found Delilah and Ruby emerging from the root cellar where they'd hidden during the visit. "He knows," Delilah said quietly. "Suspects, maybe. Doesn't know for certain. It's enough. People will start asking questions." Ruby tugged at Delilah's dress. "Mama, why did we have to hide?" "Sometimes it's safer to be invisible, sweetheart." 3 days later, Marshal Briggs returned with a larger group. 6 men this time, all armed, all determined. They searched the ranch thoroughly, going through every building, every possible hiding place. Delilah and Ruby crouched in the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, a space Zeke had expanded and disguised. They remained perfectly silent while boots stomped overhead, while men shouted questions and demands. "Someone's been staying here," one of the deputies observed. "Extra dishes in the kitchen, women's clothes in the wash basin." "Could be anyone," Zeke replied. "Might have had visitors passing through." "What kind of visitors?" "The kind that mind their own business." Briggs studied Zeke's face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. "Your health seems improved, Morrison. Last time I was here, you looked half dead. Mountain air is good for a man." "That so?" Briggs walked through the cabin slowly, examining everything. "Funny thing about that. My informants say the town doctor mentioned your remarkable recovery. Said it looked like someone with real medical knowledge was treating you." "Informants?" "People talk, Morrison, especially when there's reward money involved." The words hung heavy in the air. Someone in town was reporting back to Briggs, someone who'd spoken to Dr. Hayes about Zeke's condition. After the marshal and his men left, Zeke waited a full hour before opening the root cellar. Delilah emerged first, helping Ruby up into the kitchen. The child was pale and shaking from the stress of hiding in the dark, cramped space. "This can't continue," Delilah said. "Ruby's getting scared. She shouldn't have to live like this." "Where else can you go? It's the middle of winter." "Maybe we should turn ourselves in, face whatever they're planning to do." Zeke's response was immediate and firm. "That's not happening. You don't understand what you're risking for us." "I understand perfectly." Zeke knelt beside Ruby, smoothing her hair gently. "I understand that for the first time in 3 years, this place feels like a home. I understand that you saved my life, and I understand that some things are worth fighting for." Ruby looked up at him with eyes that trusted completely. "Are we really safe here, Papa Zeke?" The name slipped out naturally, without thought or hesitation. Both adults froze, realizing what she'd called him. "We're going to be," Zeke said finally. "I promise." Dr. Hayes returned the next afternoon, this time without the pretense of a social call. He carried his medical bag and wore the expression of a man wrestling with his conscience. "Ezekiel, we need to talk." Zeke led him to the porch, away from the cabin where Delilah was teaching Ruby to write letters in the dirt floor. The winter air was sharp, but both men ignored the cold. "I've been asking questions about Marshal Briggs," Hayes said quietly. "Nobody in Austin knows anything about him. No federal marshal by that name on any official roster." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's not who he claims to be." Hayes pulled out a folded telegram. "Sent some inquiries to colleagues down south. Got interesting information back." Zeke read the telegram twice, his jaw tightening with each word. The message was brief, but damning. No federal warrant existed for any escaped convicts matching Delilah and Ruby's description. More importantly, Clayton Briggs was the eldest son of plantation owner Cornelius Briggs of Louisiana. "He's been lying about everything," Zeke said. "Gets worse. My colleague in New Orleans says the elder Briggs has been seeking a specific healer, someone who treated consumption successfully. Apparently, the old man is dying of the same disease you had." The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Briggs wasn't hunting escaped criminals. He was hunting Delilah for her medical knowledge, planning to force her to save his father's life. "There's more," Hayes continued. "Ask some careful questions about Marshal Briggs's knowledge of medical matters. He's been asking specific questions about consumption treatments, herbal remedies, traditional healing methods. How long do we have?" He's gathering men. Local talk says he's offering good money for riders willing to help with a dangerous fugitive recovery. Planning something big. That evening, Zeke began teaching Delilah to shoot. They used an old rifle behind the barn, away from Ruby's curious eyes. Delilah's hands shook the first time she held the weapon. "I've spent my whole life healing people," she said. "This feels wrong." Sometimes protecting people means being willing to fight for them. Her first shots missed the target completely. But Delilah learned quickly, the same focus she brought to medicine serving her well with the rifle. By the end of the week, she could hit a can from 50 yards. Ruby watched these lessons with the solemn understanding of a child who'd seen too much violence already. She didn't ask questions about why Mama needed to learn shooting, but she stayed close to both adults, as if sensing danger in the wind. Zeke began preparing the ranch for siege. He moved supplies to strategic locations, created firing positions with good cover, and mapped escape routes through the surrounding hills. Every decision was made with Ruby's safety as the primary concern. "If shooting starts, you take Ruby to the root cellar and don't come out until I give the all clear," he told Delilah. "What if you can't give the all clear? Then you wait until full dark and take the trail toward town. Find Dr. Hayes. He'll help you." Delilah's hands stilled on the medical supplies she'd been organizing. "You're talking like you don't expect to survive this." "I'm talking like I want to make sure you and Ruby do." The next morning brought a letter delivered by a nervous-looking boy who galloped away before Zeke could question him. The message was written in an educated hand on expensive paper. "Mr. Morrison, you have something that belongs to my family. Return it willingly and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Refuse and face the consequences. You have until sunrise tomorrow to decide. Clayton Briggs." Delilah read the letter over his shoulder. "He's giving us a chance to surrender. He's giving us a chance to give up without a fight. That's different." Ruby appeared in the doorway, having sensed the tension between the adults. "What's wrong?" "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart," Delilah said, but her voice carried strain. "Are the bad men coming back?" Zeke knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his weathered ones. "Ruby, do you remember what we practiced? About the special hiding place?" "The root cellar." "That's right. Tomorrow you might need to hide there with your mama for a while. Can you be very brave and very quiet?" Ruby nodded solemnly. "Will you come hide with us?" "I need to stay outside and make sure nobody bothers you." "Like a guardian angel?" The innocence of the question nearly broke his heart. "Something like that." That night, none of them slept well. Zeke checked his weapons repeatedly, counted ammunition, and rehearsed the defensive plan in his mind. Delilah organized medical supplies with the efficiency of someone preparing for battle casualties. Ruby curled between them on the makeshift bed they'd arranged near the fire, her small body warm against Zeke's side. She'd taken to calling him Papa Zeke without self-consciousness, as if he'd always been part of her family. "Tell me about the stars," Ruby whispered. Zeke pointed through the small window to the winter sky. "See that bright one there? That's the North Star. No matter how lost you get, that star will always show you the way home. Will it show the bad men the way here, too? The bad men already know where we are, sweetheart, but the North Star will help good people find their way to safety." Ruby considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Are we good people, Papa Zeke?" "The best people I know." Dawn was still hours away, but Zeke could feel it coming like an approaching storm. Everything they'd built together over the past month would be tested in the morning light. 3 people who'd found each other by chance, who'd become a family out of necessity and love, now faced forces that wanted to tear them apart. Delilah's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his. Neither spoke, but both understood. Whatever came with the sunrise, they would face it together. Ruby's breathing deepened into sleep between them, trusting and peaceful, despite the danger gathering like storm clouds around their small sanctuary. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Morrison ranch. Zeke positioned himself behind the water trough with his rifle, watching the horizon for riders. Delilah and Ruby waited in the root cellar, the entrance concealed beneath a heavy rug and kitchen table. The sound of hoofbeats came first as distant thunder, then grew louder until 15 mounted men crested the hill. They spread out in a wide semicircle, surrounding the ranch buildings. Clayton Briggs rode at their center, no longer bothering with his marshal's badge. "Morrison," Briggs called out, "time's up. Send out the woman and child and nobody gets hurt." Zeke stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand. "They're not here." "We both know that's a lie." "Search all you want. You won't find them." Briggs signaled to his men. They dismounted and began approaching the cabin from multiple directions. Zeke fired a warning shot over their heads, the crack echoing across the frozen ground. "Next one won't be high," he shouted. The men froze, looking to Briggs for orders. Their leader's face hardened with frustration and growing desperation. "You're protecting a fugitive, Morrison. That makes you a criminal, too." "Funny thing about that," Zeke replied. "Had a talk with the real authorities. Seems there's no warrant for any fugitives matching their description. Makes a man wonder what you really want." Something flickered in Briggs's expression. Fear, perhaps, or the realization that his deception was unraveling. "My father is dying," Briggs said, his voice carrying across the yard. "The same disease that was killing you. She can save him. So ask her nicely. Don't come here with guns and threats." "I tried asking nicely. She refused. Maybe because you're the reason she's running in the first place." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 15 armed men against one rancher with a rifle. The odds couldn't have been worse, but Zeke had advantages they didn't. He knew every inch of his land, every piece of cover, every angle of approach. The first shot came from his left flank. One of Briggs's men tried to reach the barn, thinking he could get behind Zeke's position. The bullet splintered wood near the man's head, sending him diving for cover. "Stay down," Zeke called out. "I've got enough ammunition to keep this up all day." But they both knew that wasn't true. Zeke had maybe 50 rounds, and 15 men could overwhelm him through sheer persistence. His only hope was to make the cost too high for them to stomach. A rifle cracked from the direction of the road, then another. Zeke risked a glance and saw Dr. Hayes approaching with Sheriff Williams and 3 deputies. The real law had arrived. "Nobody move!" Sheriff Williams shouted. "Everyone drop your weapons!" Briggs wheeled his horse toward the newcomers. "Sheriff, these men are helping me apprehend dangerous fugitives." "Funny thing, Briggs. Or should I call you by your real name?" Hayes dismounted, holding up the telegram. "Clayton Briggs, son of plantation owner Cornelius Briggs. No federal authority whatsoever." Several of Briggs's hired men began backing away, realizing they'd been drawn into something more complicated than a simple manhunt. Others remained loyal to their employer, unwilling to abandon the job they'd been paid to complete. "My father is dying," Briggs repeated, his voice rising with desperation. "She has the knowledge to save him, and she's refusing out of spite." "Can't imagine why," Sheriff Williams replied dryly. "Maybe because you've been hunting her across 3 states with armed men." The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Too many weapons, too much tension, too many men who'd invested too much to back down easily. Zeke kept his rifle trained on Briggs, knowing the man was desperate enough to do something foolish. That's when Ruby made her mistake. The sound of approaching horses had frightened her in the root cellar. Despite Delilah's whispered pleas to stay quiet, the 8-year-old pushed open the hidden entrance and ran toward the cabin, crying for Papa Zeke. "Ruby, no!" Zeke shouted. But she was already in the open, visible to every man in the yard. Briggs spurred his horse forward, leaning down to scoop up the running child. Ruby screamed as he lifted her onto his saddle, his arm tight around her waist. "Now we negotiate properly," Briggs called out, his voice triumphant. "The woman comes with me willingly, or the child pays the price." Delilah emerged from the root cellar, her hands empty, her face a mask of controlled terror. "Let her go. I'll come with you." Smart choice. But Ruby wasn't finished fighting. She bit down hard on Briggs's arm, twisting in his grip with the fury of a wildcat. The sudden movement startled his horse, which reared and spun sideways. Zeke didn't hesitate. He launched himself from the porch, tackling both Briggs and Ruby off the horse. They hit the frozen ground hard, Zeke absorbing most of the impact to protect the child. Briggs rolled away and came up with a pistol, but Zeke was faster. His fist connected with the man's jaw, sending the weapon spinning across the yard. They grappled in the dirt, years of ranch work giving Zeke strength that his opponent hadn't expected. "Stop!" Delilah's voice cut through the chaos. She stood 10 feet away, holding Briggs's dropped pistol with steady hands. "I said stop!" Both men froze. Delilah's face was calm, but her eyes held something that made even the hardened gunmen step back. "I've spent my entire life healing people," she said quietly, "bringing babies into the world, mending broken bones, easing pain. Don't make me break that promise today." Briggs slowly raised his hands. Around the yard, his remaining men began lowering their weapons. The fight had gone out of them when they realized their leader had been willing to use a child as a human shield. Sheriff Williams stepped forward with iron shackles. "Clayton Briggs, you're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, kidnapping, and assault." Ruby ran to Delilah, who dropped the pistol and swept her daughter into her arms. Zeke climbed to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs, but alive and whole. The siege was over. Sheriff Williams loaded Clayton Briggs into the wagon with practiced efficiency. The man who'd terrorized them for weeks looked smaller now, his arrogance replaced by the hollow stare of someone facing serious prison time. "What happens to him?" Zeke asked. "Federal charges for impersonating a marshal. State charges for kidnapping and assault. He won't see freedom for a long time." Dr. Hayes approached Delilah with genuine respect in his manner. "Ma'am, I'd like to discuss your medical knowledge if you're willing. What you've accomplished with Ezekiel's consumption is remarkable." Delilah shifted Ruby to her other arm, still protective but no longer hunted. "I use traditional remedies my grandmother taught me. Would you consider sharing that knowledge? Our town could use another healer." The offer hung in the air like morning mist. Zeke watched Delilah's face, seeing hope war with caution. A lifetime of persecution made trust difficult, even when safety seemed within reach. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Sheriff Williams tipped his hat before climbing onto his wagon. "Mrs. Freeman, you and your daughter are welcome in this county. Anyone gives you trouble, they answer to me." The wagon rolled away, taking Clayton Briggs and the last of their fears with it. Ruby wiggled down from her mother's arms and ran to Zeke, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Papa Zeke, are the bad men really gone?" "They're really gone, sweetheart. Forever and ever? Forever and ever." The three of them stood in the yard as the sun climbed higher, melting frost from the grass and warming the air with the promise of spring. For the first time in months, the future stretched ahead of them without the shadow of pursuit. 1 month later, the Morrison Ranch hummed with life and purpose. Zeke's health had stabilized completely under Delilah's continued care. His strength returned, his appetite improved, and the gray pallor of sickness had been replaced by the ruddiness of a man who expected to see many more years. Ruby attended the local school 3 days a week, her quick mind impressing the teacher with her reading ability and natural curiosity. The other children had accepted her with the easy tolerance of the young, more interested in her stories about ranch life than the color of her skin. Delilah had begun treating townspeople alongside Dr. Hayes. Word of her abilities spread quietly through the community, bringing patients who'd exhausted other options. She saved a blacksmith's infected hand, delivered a difficult baby safely, and cured a merchant's chronic headaches with herbal teas. The respect she earned was hard-won but genuine. People who'd initially viewed her with suspicion now sought her expertise, paying her fairly for services that improved their lives measurably. But success brought its own concerns. Delilah worried they'd imposed on Zeke's hospitality too long, that their presence complicated his life in ways he was too kind to mention. "We should start looking for our own place," she told him one evening after Ruby had gone to sleep. "You've been more generous than we had any right to expect." Zeke looked up from the harness he was mending, genuine confusion on his face. "Your own place? What are you talking about? We can't stay here forever. You have your own life to live. My life? Zeke set down his tools and turned to face her fully. Delilah, my life was over 3 years ago when Sarah died. I was just too stubborn to lie down and die properly. You and Ruby didn't interrupt my life. You gave me one. The words carried weight that made her breath catch. In the firelight, his weathered face showed vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. We're not your responsibility, she said softly. No, you're not. You're my family. Ruby stirred in her bed near the fireplace, mumbling sleepily. Mama, are we going away? Shh, sweetheart, go back to sleep. But Ruby was fully awake now, sitting up with the serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. I don't want to go away. This is home. Ruby, we can't just assume we're welcome to stay forever. Why not? The child's logic was unassailable in its simplicity. Papa Zeke wants us here. We want to be here. Why would we go anywhere else? Zeke knelt beside Ruby's bed, smoothing her dark curls gently. Would you like to stay here forever? More than anything. Then that's settled. He looked up at Delilah. Don't you dare leave us now. We're just getting started. 2 weeks later, Zeke presented them with his answer to their living situation. He'd spent days carving and sanding, creating something beautiful from rough pine boards. The wooden sign read, "The Morrison Freeman Ranch," in bold, clear letters. Below that, in smaller script, he'd added, "Home." It's not a proposal, he explained, suddenly awkward with the magnitude of what he was offering. It's a promise. This is your home for as long as you want it. Both of you. Always. Ruby ran her fingers over the carved letters, sounding out the words with growing excitement. Morrison Freeman Ranch, that's us. That's our family name. Delilah touched the smooth wood with something approaching reverence. After years of running, of never belonging anywhere, the permanence represented by that sign felt almost too precious to accept. Are you certain? She asked. I've never been more certain of anything. That afternoon, they installed the sign at the front gate. Ruby insisted on helping, her small hands guiding the nails while Zeke hammered them home. Delilah watched from the porch, finally allowing herself to believe in the future they were building together. As evening approached, they walked toward the cabin together. Ruby skipped ahead, chattering about her plans for the vegetable garden she wanted to plant in spring. Delilah and Zeke followed more slowly, hands clasped, hearts full of quiet contentment. The wooden sign swayed gently in the Texas wind, proclaiming to the world that this was home, not just a place to stay, but a destination worth fighting for, a family worth everything. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming. Outside, the North Star appeared in the darkening sky, steady and bright, showing the way home for anyone wise enough to follow its guidance. 3 people who'd found each other in a snowstorm had become something stronger than the sum of their individual parts. They'd created love from loss, hope from desperation, and family from the simple choice to care for one another. The Morrison Freeman Ranch was more than land and buildings. It was proof that home isn't a place you're born to, but a place you choose to build, one day at a time, with the people who matter most.